What if I told you that your moral compass, the thing you trust to tell you right from wrong, isn't a compass at all? What if it's just a piece of iron, and anyone with a strong enough magnet can point it wherever they want? You'd push back. You'd say you know yourself too well, that your values are too deeply held. I know that sounds completely backwards, but stick with me, because a man proved this in 5 days. In a classroom, with ordinary students who thought they were immune. Let's start with something that probably happened to you recently. You were in a group. Could be at work, could be online, could be a social circle. And someone said something you disagreed with. And you stayed quiet. Not because you were afraid of being attacked, but because it was easier. Because speaking up would have made you the outsider. And something in you calculated that being wrong together felt safer than being right alone. You didn't consciously decide this. It happened in a fraction of a second. Your brain weighing social risk against personal conviction and choosing safety every time. That calculation you made in that moment? It's not a character flaw. It's how your brain is wired. Your ancestors survived because they stayed inside the tribe. The one who wandered off alone didn't pass their genes down to you. And in 1967, a history teacher named Ron Jones proved just how far that wiring can take you. A student asked him a question we've all asked. How could ordinary Germans claim they knew nothing about the Holocaust? Jones couldn't answer with words. So he decided to show them. He called it the third wave. And within 5 days, he turned free-thinking teenagers into something they never believed they could become. Here's where it gets really interesting. Day 1 was posture. Sit with your feet flat, back straight, hands crossed behind you. A mantra, strength through discipline. The students laughed at first. Then the room went silent. When you remove the burden of choice, you remove the burden of the self. And the self, as anyone who has ever laid awake at 3 in the morning knows, is a source of immense suffering. Jones hadn't threatened anyone. He hadn't bribed anyone. He had simply offered his students a structure. And structure is a sedative for an anxious mind. By day 2, Jones introduced a salute, a membership card. Strength through community. Students began saluting each other in the hallways. They weren't being threatened. They weren't being paid. They had simply been given permission to be part of something bigger than themselves. Now, I want to pause here because this is where most people check out. They hear this story and think, I would never. They put themselves on the other side of the glass, the safe side. The side where morality is a fixed trait, you either have it or you don't. But the experiment wasn't about who those students were. It was about what happens when you offer anyone an escape from the burden of being an individual. By day 3, the experiment turned dark. Jones assigned some students to be monitors, who would report anyone showing signs of dissent. Friends turned on friends. The classroom became a surveillance state run by teenagers who had been given permission to be more important than they were before. This is the paradox that sits at the center of human psychology. We want to be free, but we are terrified of the responsibility that comes with it. We would rather be a cog in a powerful machine than a ghost in a free world. The third wave gave those students something they didn't know they were starving for, a reason to stop thinking for themselves. Day 4. Over 80 students had joined far beyond the original class. Jones told them the third wave was part of a national movement, that a presidential candidate would announce a youth program on television the next day. They believed him, not because they were stupid, because by that point, their identity was the group. Leaving would have meant leaving themselves. This principle shows up everywhere once you start looking for it. Think about water for a moment. Water doesn't fight the rock. It doesn't argue with the mountain. It just flows where the channel already exists. Your brain does the same thing. It flows into the identities that are already carved out for you. The algorithm knows this. Every platform you use is designed around this exact vulnerability. Your social group knows this, even if none of you would say it out loud. And somewhere along the way, you stopped noticing it was happening. Not because you're weak, because you're human. Day 5. The students gathered in an auditorium. 200 of them now. Perfect discipline. Waiting for their leader to tell them they were the future. Instead, Jones turned on a television showing nothing but static. After minutes of silence, he told them the truth. There was no movement. They had been part of an experiment. Then he showed them footage of the Nuremberg rallies. The students wept. Some walked out in a daze. In 5 days, they had gone from free-thinking teenagers to the very thing they thought they could never be. But here's where most people get stuck. They hear this story, feel a moment of discomfort, and then go back to scrolling. Because the experiment feels like history. Something that happened in a classroom in 1967. Something that couldn't happen to them. But the third wave didn't end in that auditorium, it just changed shape. So here's the exercise. I want you to do this right now before the video ends. Think about the last time you changed your opinion. Not because you were presented with new evidence, but because the group you belong to shifted. Think about a belief you hold that would cost you socially if you voice the opposite. Maybe it's political. Maybe it's about your career. Maybe it's something smaller. A show everyone loves that you secretly can't stand. Now ask yourself, do you actually believe it? Or has the group been holding the magnet to your compass for so long that you've forgotten what north feels like? There's a second part to this. Identify one space in your life where you are the dissenter, where you've been staying quiet to avoid the cost of speaking. It could be at work, in a group chat, in a relationship. And this week, I want you to say the thing you've not been saying. Not aggressively, not to start a fight, just to prove to yourself that your compass still moves independently. The third wave was terrifying not because of what Ron Jones did, but because of what those students discovered about themselves. They learned that morality isn't a fixed point, it's a muscle, and muscles atrophy when you stop using them. Every time you stayed quiet when you should have spoken, every time you nodded along because nodding was easier, that muscle got a little weaker. The good news is that atrophy can be reversed, but it requires a cost you may not be willing to pay, the temporary loneliness of standing alone. The question isn't whether you would have joined the wave in 1967. The question is whether you're swimming in one right now and calling it freedom. The ironic art of thinking for yourself isn't about being smarter than everyone else. It's about being willing to stand alone long enough to hear your own voice again. And if you can do that, if you can sit in that discomfort without reaching for the nearest group to tell you who to be, you become something most people never will. You become free. If this landed for you, subscribe and share with someone who needs to hear it.